I am tearing up.
I just about screamed right now, and I'm not even there.
Now that's inspirational, Natalie. I feel inspired today.
Are you kidding? I could be here for another hour.
And I was top of my class. There were only 2 of us, and the other guy was in the hospital. So here I am.
And I always go, he winds up homeless on the street. It's my fault.
Yeah, now you sound like my wife.
And you can get off.
I don't know. Call it Google. Or call it Google.
Border Patrol. Alexa, how does he get across?
Paul, I cut you off earlier. What were you going to say?
What?
Dang it! Don't do that to me, Paul. Don't do that to me, man.
I don't know what got into my head, but I thought this thought, if I'm working year round, I might as well get paid year round.
Sweet Talk is a weekly 20-minute podcast brought to you by the Continuing Education and Workforce Training Division of Idaho State University's College of Technology. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and SoundCloud, and subscribe today. Now, it's time to get started with Sweet Talk.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Sweet Talk, our weekly podcast here at Continuing Education Workforce Training at Idaho State University. Today, it's just me and Angie Wilhelm, my co-host, and our new marketing person who's joining us. This is your 5th, 6th podcast, Angie?
Yes, I believe so, somewhere around then.
Okay, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Paul?
It's a great day. It's a great day. You know why it's a great day? I got a couple of days before I'm on vacation.
Oh, yes, you are. So Paul is heading south to even hotter weather shortly.
Shortly, yes. But it will be fun because I get to relax for at least a couple of days. I haven't had a vacation in 6 years. So I'm looking forward to it. So Angie, we have a great guest with us today, don't we?
We do. We have Peter Pruitt. He is the director of Zoo Idaho in Pocatello, Idaho. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Peter, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, podcast world. I'm Peter Pruitt. I'm the director of Zoo Idaho. I came here in 2014. Prior to that, I'm going backwards. I came from Duluth, Minnesota, via Atlanta, Georgia, via Philadelphia, PA, via Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I grew up in the other Idaho, or actually I should say, I grew up in the real Iowa in Northwest Iowa. So been around for a while. This is closing in on, this year will be 29 years of professional service post undergrad graduation. So we all have to get older sometimes.
So how did you come to be a zoo director, Peter?
That's kind of a great little story. So I started off in Tulsa as the large mammal swing keeper / elephant keeper. And all my career has been with large mammals. That's pretty fairly heavy workload. And, you always felt one, for my body's sake, I wanted to move into management. And for my mental sake, I like a challenge. And as you move up in the quote ranks of zookeeping, you get exposed to more and more challenges. And it's also one of the reasons why I really do love and prefer smaller zoos. I've worked in the large, massive operating budgets above $100 million a year to here in Pocatello, where we are under $1 million in operating budget. Mm-hmm. So there's a larger challenge within the zoo. I don't have a whole lot of people I can delegate tasks to. I've had to learn a little bit about marketing, a little bit about fundraising, a little bit about education, well beyond just large mammals. I've had to learn about reptiles and birds. Birds are kind of my least favorite of critters, but I've been forced to learn about them. And so that's a good challenge. And the other thing too, is as we look at zoos in particular, with my background, we are really driving home a conservation message within zoos now. I feel it's actually easier and more important within a smaller zoo and a smaller community, because they don't have access to, yes, we can go down to the Hogle Zoo or Zoo Boise. They're larger zoos. You know, the Idaho Falls Zoo, they've got a significantly larger operating budget. It's simply because they're exotic animals where we're indigenous. They're kind of similar to us. If I'm going to the Hogle Zoo, I'm going there as one of multiple things I'm going to do during the day in Salt Lake City. And I saw that especially when I was in Atlanta. We can run over 1 million people, but the majority, I would say 75% of the people that came through the zoo were probably traveling through Atlanta and stopped at the zoo as part of their vacation trips. And getting a conservation message to them is possible, but if we can do it within our community, within the community of Pocatello, it's more lasting. It's significant impact. Conservation starts at our front door, and it doesn't end when we walk out the back door. And especially within Idaho, we do have, I mean, we are a little bit behind the game, and I will give the city of Pocatello lots of credit. They are moving forward, and they are trying very hard to bring conservation into every aspect of our lives. You know, with the Portneuf River revisioning program, that is absolutely fantastic. We're recycling glass now in Pocatello, so that's another really strong step forward. And with all our public lands, we have a fantastic opportunity to really make a significant change in our habitats and environments here in Idaho.
Well, that's actually led me right into our next question. Can you talk about the conservation and rescue efforts of Zoo Idaho itself?
Oh, absolutely. So Zoo Idaho is unique doubly. We're one of a handful of strictly indigenous zoos across the United States. There's about 12. Now, there's plenty of zoos that carry native species within their zoo as well, but they include, that's a small part of their zoo. They're mainly exotic. You know, we're 100% indigenous, which is wonderful. And the great part too is we really are literally a rescue facility disguised as a zoo. All the animals that you see that have come into the zoo since my arrival 8 years ago have basically been through Idaho Fish and Game and Fish and Wildlife Services. These are animals that can't thrive in the wild anymore. Now, we do have 4 Nigerian dwarf goats that I did purchase, but we also have our 3 sheep. We've got a couple other goats and a cow that were actually donated to us because the owners really didn't have the opportunity to care for them the way they would like to anymore. And so they did a really great job reaching out to us, and we had room for them. But, you know, all of our, I mean, a great example is our 2 black bears. So wonderful, wonderful stories. So their names are Cooper and Roscoe. Cooper was found as a cub, you know, like a month old or so, still very small. He was found up in the McCall region by his deceased mother. And we had some backpackers, and this is years ago, we had some backpackers who found him, and they literally wrapped him up in a blanket, hiked out and got a hold of Fish and Game. And then Fish and Game were able to eventually get him to us. And then a year later, our little guy, Roscoe, was found in the McCall area, again, different spot, as an orphan and injured and emaciated. So he was big enough, he was 3-4 months old. So he was big enough that the hikers didn't wrap him up in a blanket. That wouldn't have been a good story for the hikers, but they were able to come back and contact Fish and Game, and Fish and Game were able to find him. And then again, I think he went into a rehab facility first before he came to Zoo Idaho. So we have plenty of stories like that on all of our animals.
Now, can you talk a little bit about the wetlands and the Swan project?
Yeah, this is another one. We're working with Fish and Wildlife Services, and it's kind of evolved as we've been moving forward with the project. We have a 3.5 acre wetland. It's the 3.5 acres of surface area of water. We're managing it like a true wetland. The deepest section is about 30 to 36 inches deep. So, I mean, wetlands aren't a lake or a pond, so they're super shallow. And the edges of it are really shallow. And initially, our goal was to develop a trumpeter swan breeding and release program. So in our region, we have the greater Yellowstone trumpeter swan population, or the Rocky Mountain population. They're found in Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. And the numbers are actually stable. We have the numbers where they need to be, but the issue is we're not seeing a lot of nesting and reproduction within this trumpeter swan population. And so there is concern that if there's any type of pressure on the population, the numbers would drop drastically. So initially we were looking at starting up a breeding program, which will still be part of it. However, at 3.5 acres, it's only large enough to have one breeding pair of trumpeter swans. And just because you bring a boy trumpeter swan and a girl trumpeter swan together doesn't mean they're going to like each other. So you have to go through this process of hopefully when you pair them up that they actually do fall into trumpeter swan love and mate and lay eggs, right? So it's a long process. What we've ended up doing is working with the species survival plan coordinator in Cleveland Metro Park Zoo. Her name is Tiffany, wonderful person to work with captive breeding and trumpeter swans and other Association of Zoos and Aquariums accredited facilities. What we've ended up doing is we are looking at transitioning into a overwintering area for cygnet and white birds. So cygnets are baby swans, 0 to 1 year old. And then in the spring, after their first year, they molt and they get white feathers like a real trumpeter swan, but they're still juvies in a sense. And so they call them white birds. And so what we would end up doing is we'll be bringing in these cygnet and white birds into Zoo Idaho in October, and they would overwinter in our wetlands facility because it is still in a controlled environment, but we are able to isolate them pretty much from humans so they don't really start relying on humans, but they get an opportunity to spend a year in what a real wetlands would look like. And then we would release them in the spring. The first few years we're working with the state of Oregon, and we'll release these white birds in Oregon. And then as Idaho is working with Montana and Wyoming on the Rocky Mountain population, eventually we'd like to transition into Rocky Mountain populations as well. And these are going to be birds coming across the United States that were bred in captivity. And the reason why we're doing the overwintering is because the success rate jumps from under 50%. The survival success rate jumps from under 50% to over 85% when we do that. So we have an opportunity of really jump-starting, especially in Oregon, the trumpeter swan conservation projects.
Okay, now
Excellent.
Can you talk a little bit about, you seem like you've worked with captive bred animals, as well as right now you're working with injured animals, right? They were wild animals that were brought into the zoo. That same thing will kind of happen with the swans as well. Can you talk about the biggest challenges and rewards facing working with rescued animals that were born in the wild versus captive bred animals at zoos?
So with our rescued animals, for the most part, they're coming in as orphans, usually under a year old. And when we look at our hoof stock, especially elk and mule deer and pronghorn, they'll come in, they could be 48 hours old, or they could be 3 months old. We still have to, especially with the ones that need to be bottle fed, we're basically feeding them every 2 to 3 hours. And that includes when we go home after work. And I've been I kind of feel, my keepers, my team, they're the ones that are out in the hot sun all day long. And they don't need to wake up at midnight or 2 or 3 a.m. to come in and feed. So I'll take those. And after a while, it's usually a month or so, you're just like, that old Dunkin' Donuts commercial, time to make donuts.
Take the donuts.
Time to feed the elk fawns. And you're like, and the truth is, when you have wild animals and you bottle feed them, they become weird in a sense, because they are acclimated to humans, especially the hoof stock, because you're like, oh, you guys are considered part of the herd, part of the family. And there are challenges with bottle fed animals. I would say at times certain animals are way more dangerous as being bottle fed than not. Long-term goals is for us to bring in 2 to 3 wolves, hopefully 3 siblings. And I don't want bottle fed wolves, because they do turn into one of the most dangerous animals in a zoo. Wolves are pack animals. The hierarchy isn't consistent. Your alpha, and I kind of prefer to call your dominant male and female, will hold that position for a couple of years, 2 to 3 years, and then kind of move on. But underneath, all these wolves within the pack are constantly testing dominance. And if you bottle feed a wolf, they look at you as part of the pack. And so they're gonna always test your dominance, and it's gonna be subtle at first. And there will always come a point where if that wolf does, in a sense, become more dominant than the human keeper, if they knock that human keeper down, if that human keeper shows a measure of fear because the wolf was nipping at your heel or leg, that human keeper no longer goes in with those wolves, because they're on the bottom of the hierarchy, and it just made their job exponentially more dangerous. And what you end up doing is, what the wolves don't know won't hurt them type thing. If we can bring in wolves that have been weaned, rescue wolves that have been weaned, and they still have to be under a year old. They have to be, 3, 4, 5 months old. If they come in weaned, then we would go in there with 2 staff. One would be the one that services the exhibit. The other would be considered a guard. And they always keep the wolves 20, 30 feet away. If they come, wolves are timid by nature. Ignore, the Brothers Grimm's stories about wolves. They're curious, but they're not highly aggressive animals. And so you can keep them, you just stand there with a shovel, go like, roar, and they stay away. So, that's the important part. They never realize that they are anything other than, oh, that's a human, we need to stay away. And then the other trick is, as well, you can't bring adult wild wolves into captivity. They literally go crazy once you put them in a captive situation. Wow. So you've got that fine little point for us anyway, and I would prefer to rescue. We can always work with other facilities to bring in, captive bred wolves, but it kind of defeats the purpose of the zoo as a rescue facility.
Right.
And I do feel that very comfortable that we would find 2 to 3 cubs in that sweet spot where they're weaned, but they aren't fully wild yet.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about what types of jobs there are at zoos, or how someone could get into this line of work if they wanted to kind of follow in your footsteps and get involved with zoos in general or rescue zoos? Oh,
absolutely. So I think people have a misconception that you have to be a biology or a life science major to become a professional zookeeper. You don't. One of the best keepers I've ever worked with and for me, he had an art history degree, but he absolutely loved animals, and he started volunteering at Zoo Atlanta when he was a kid, and then he would do he interned in the education department, and then eventually got himself a job in the reptile department and worked around. And so a 4-year degree is we say we prefer it. Experience also is great as well. To me, a 4-year degree shows a measure of commitment. You're not going to get wealthy being a zookeeper, not at all. And there's so many different aspects of a zoo. Yes, you're going to have your animal keepers, you're going to have your education department, and so people with an education background, outdoor education background as well. It's going to be in an informal setting, so you've got people that we've got educators in there. We have, especially in larger zoos, we're part of the city, so our finance department handles all the financials. But large zoos, not-for-profit zoos, they're going to have a CFO, they're going to have accountants underneath them, you're going to have an HR department with all that underneath them as well. You're going to have marketing and development. And so there's the big picture is that there are a ton of different jobs that you can take within a zoo. You don't have to be an animal expert to make significant contributions to the zoo you work at. And, honestly, development is probably one of the most important aspects of any zoo. It's not cheap to run and operate a zoo. They need money. And most zoos nowadays are on the not-for-profit end. And you can't keep a zoo open just strictly off of admissions. You got to be able to write grants. You got to be able to woo potential donors and find ways where everyone within the community can participate in your zoo. You don't need to get $10 million donations each time. Someone who can drop $100 onto their zoo is absolutely fantastic. So yeah, it's I would say, one, find the niche that you absolutely enjoy to do in your life. And don't be afraid to look at zoos, because there's a good chance that there's going to be something within that zoo that covers that niche. And the best way to look for job openings is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. It's aza.org. That's where there's 200 plus accredited facilities across the United States. Every accredited facility will advertise any and all of their zoo positions on that website. So it's just not for keepers. Yeah. I've seen CEOs and CFOs advertised on that website. If you've got an animal facility around you, whether it's a rehab facility or it's a zoo, if you think it's a possibility for your career, definitely go to that zoo, go to the rehab facility, find time to volunteer, because I do see a lot of people who come in and their expectations of what it is to work at a zoo are totally off from reality. It's hard work. And I think sometimes they think that they get to spend a lot of time interacting and playing with these really cool animals, but that's not the case. So intern first, because you might realize like, oh yeah, this isn't for me, or, oh, this is absolutely for me, but I just found out that department looks really cool. So yeah, and talk to them.
Excellent.
Zookeepers love to talk to people. So if you're at a zoo and you think you might look at it as a career, flag a zoo employee down. It doesn't even have to be a keeper. Flag them down and just talk to them. They'll talk with you.
Excellent, excellent. Hey, we are near the end of our podcast episode, but I have one question. What is the most rewarding part of your job?
And that's changed over the years that I've spent here. When I first started, it really was initially, and it was really short, about a year as I was getting my feet into the business. I really loved and enjoyed working with the animals. As a large mammal keeper, I worked with the carnivores, hoofstock, elephants, so it was really intense. Cleaning out a white rhinoceros yard isn't really easy. In 24 hours, 3 of them will fill the back end of a pickup truck. So it turned into, as I was able to get more comfortable with, and I was done with my training, it took over a year for me to train in all of those areas. But as I got done with that, I had more time where I could actually interact with our guests and the community. And that turned into a real rewarding aspect, because zoos aren't 100% positive. You've got animals in captivity, and no matter what, it's different. And so you're talking with our general public who might say, oh, zoos are bad, and if they leave, and they don't have to sit there and go, oh my gosh, I changed my mind, zoos are wonderful. But if they leave and they start thinking about the reason for zoos and why we have zoos, and especially at Zoo Idaho as a rescue facility as well. And as I've moved up, I really truly enjoy seeing my team and the staff around me thrive and progress in their careers. My success isn't measured on what I've actually done at the zoo. My success is what the team around me has done. I've been able to, I think, as it's been 15 years and I'm closing in on, I've had 5 or more of the team I've worked with move into management, whether it's lead keep, curator, etc. That's success. When I look at our education programs and Rachel, our education director, and how she has these last few years, even through COVID, has just absolutely thrived and has developed amazing programs. And it's the same thing with the keepers, as they've grown as keepers and in training and everything involved with that. And I do have staff that I know, if they choose to, would make excellent leaders. So that's where success is.
Excellent. That's great. So Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. I've learned a lot. I have been to the zoo. I haven't been in a while, to be honest. I haven't been in a while, but I think I'm going to make a visit there. Just to check it out.
We're growing, making improvements, building new exhibits and facilities. So yeah, it's a zoo in progress, and it's fun to be part of that as well.
Excellent. Now, if someone wanted to contact the zoo, how would they do that?
So the easiest thing is to go to our website, which is zooidaho.org. And they'll be able to get our phone numbers there. There's even a email, your zoo. I think it's yourzoo@pocatello.us. And our phone number is 208-234-6264. And even if you swing by and you got questions, you go into our gift shop, our gift shop. If they can't answer, they're going to call someone. So yeah. But the big one is go to our website, zooidaho.org.
Zooidaho.org. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Peter.
Oh, this has been a blast.
Yeah. No. So if anyone wants, hey, Angie, as always, thank you so much for joining me today as well. So if anyone wants to get a hold of us here at Idaho State University Continuing Education Workforce Training, you can go and visit our website at cetrain.isu.edu. You can email us at cetrain@isu.edu. And you can also call us the old-fashioned way at 208-282-3372. Thank you so much for listening, and everyone be safe out there.